My wife cheated with her coworker and asked for an open marriage to keep seeing him. I pretended to agree. But when she returned from her date, I had another woman at home and divorce papers she never saw coming. I'm 32 years old, I work in finance, and what happened 6 months ago basically destroyed my 6-year marriage to Amanda. But it also taught me that sometimes the person you think you know best in the world can become a complete stranger overnight. I guess I should start from the beginning, when everything seemed normal, or at least that's what I thought. Amanda and I got married when I was 26 and she was 24. After being together for like 3 years, it was one of those relationships that just worked, without much drama or complications. We had our routines, our Friday date nights, our Sunday mornings making breakfast together, and all that stuff that makes a marriage feel stable. I worked at an accounting firm doing corporate audits, regular Monday to Friday hours, and Amanda worked in marketing for a medium-sized company, also office hours. On weekends, we'd go out with friends, watch movies, do the normal things married people do. Looking back, I think I had become too comfortable, too confident that what we had was solid, and that was my first mistake. Everything started changing about a year ago, but so gradually that I didn't notice it at first. Amanda started spending more time on her phone, like obsessively checking it during dinner or when we were watching TV together. At first I thought it was work, because in marketing they're always on social media and stuff, so I didn't think much of it. She also started dressing up more for the office, buying new clothes, doing her makeup more elaborately, and when I asked her about it, she'd say she just wanted to feel good about herself, that she'd been neglecting her appearance. At the time it seemed reasonable. I even liked seeing her happy, but I should have seen it coming because all those changes came with an emotional distance that started growing between us. Then Kristen came into her life. Kristen was a new coworker who had recently gotten divorced. She was like 35 years old, and, according to Amanda, she was super modern and independent. Amanda started talking about her constantly, like Kristen says this. Kristen thinks that Kristen has this philosophy about relationships. I remember one day, Amanda came home and told me that Kristen had been telling her about non-monogamous relationships and open marriages, and that she found it interesting how some people were modernizing the concept of marriage. I laughed and said something like, well, to each their own, and she just smiled and changed the subject. But that conversation stuck with me because there was something weird about her tone, like she was testing the waters. Things continued like that for another 3 or 4 months, with Amanda getting increasingly distant and me getting increasingly confused. I tried talking to her several times, asking if everything was okay, if something was bothering her, but she'd always say no. Everything was perfect. She was just a bit stressed with work. I wanted to believe her, honestly, because the alternative was thinking something more serious was happening, and I wasn't ready to face that possibility. Then she started mentioning Scott. 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 Suddenly, Scott was the topic of all her work conversations. Scott had said something clever in a meeting. Scott had interesting ideas about digital marketing. Scott thought traditional relationships were obsolete in the modern world. That last comment made me raise my eyebrows, but Amanda said it so casually, as if it were just a random observation from a coworker, that again, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Everything exploded one Thursday night 6 months ago. Amanda was in the shower and her phone, which she'd left on the living room table, started buzzing with messages. Normally I would never check her phone. I'd never had reasons to distrust her, but something inside me said to look. And there it was, a complete conversation with Scott that basically confirmed all my worst suspicions. They weren't just work messages. They were intimate messages, flirty, full of sexual innuendos and plans to meet after work. There was one that said, I can't stop thinking about yesterday in the parking lot, and another that said, my wife is out of town this weekend. We could take advantage. I felt like I'd been hit in the stomach with a baseball bat. I literally had to sit down because my legs wouldn't respond. When Amanda came out of the shower, I was sitting on the couch with her phone in my hand. She saw me and went pale, and I could only say, who is Scott? She tried to grab the phone from me, but I stood up and moved away, and I said, no, answer me. Who is Scott, and what does all this mean? Amanda started crying, which seemed ironic to me considering she was the one doing something wrong, and told me she could explain that it wasn't what it seemed. I said, "Really? It's not what it seems? Because it seems like you're having an affair with your coworker," and she went quiet for a moment and then told me something I'll never forget. "Thomas, I need you to understand that love can exist in different forms, that it doesn't have to be limited to one person." I couldn't believe it. I simply couldn't. This was the woman I'd married, the woman who had sworn eternal love to me 6 years ago. And now she was talking to me like she was some kind of modern relationship guru, quoting Scott and Kristen. I asked her directly if she'd had sex with Scott, and after a long silence, she told me, yes, that it had happened twice, but that didn't mean she didn't love me. I laughed, a bitter laugh without humor, and told her, "You know what, Amanda? You're right. Love can exist in different forms, but marriage has rules, and you broke them." Neither of us slept that night. I stayed in the living room, unable to process what was happening, and Amanda locked herself in the bedroom crying. The next day, a Friday, Amanda didn't go to work, and I took the day off too. We sat down to talk. Or, rather, she tried to talk and I listened. She told me that Kristen had opened her eyes to new ways of living relationships. That Scott was an interesting man who understood that love shouldn't have restrictions, and that she'd been feeling trapped in our marriage for a while. I asked her why she'd never said anything, why she didn't try to talk to me if she wasn't happy, and she told me she was afraid of hurting me, which seemed absolutely ridiculous, considering she'd just destroyed my heart. Then Amanda proposed something that still seems incredible to me when I think about it. She asked me if I'd be willing to modernize our marriage, to allow us to explore connections with other people while maintaining our relationship as a base. Basically, she was asking permission to keep seeing Scott while I stayed home waiting for her, like an idiot. I asked her if Scott knew she was married, and she said yes, that he was also married, and that his wife supposedly agreed with his affairs, which I, later discovered, was completely false. Amanda told me she just wanted to be honest with me, that she appreciated that we could now have an open conversation about this, and asked me to think about it over the weekend. I spent that weekend at my older brother's house, trying to process everything. He told me I should divorce immediately, that it was obvious Amanda didn't respect me or value our marriage, but I was still in shock. You know, that part of you that doesn't want to accept that your life just completely changed. Monday morning, I went back home and told Amanda I needed time to think, that I couldn't make a decision like that so quickly. She seemed relieved and thanked me for being so understanding, which made me nauseous because I wasn't being understanding. I was buying time to figure out what to do. During the next week, I acted like I was considering her proposal. I'd ask her questions about how it would work, what rules we'd have, that kind of thing. And Amanda was excited, thinking. I was accepting her new life philosophy. Meanwhile, I was investigating Scott. I looked up his LinkedIn profile, found his Facebook, and then I did something I never thought I'd do. I contacted Lauren, a coworker of Amanda's who she'd mentioned casually in previous conversations. I sent her a message vaguely explaining that I needed information about Scott, and Lauren, who turned out to be incredibly smart and observant, told me she'd call me after work. Lauren told me everything. Scott was like 38 years old, married, had 2 kids, and apparently had a pattern of seducing young women at the office with his speech about modern relationships and free love. Lauren told me she knew of at least 2 other women Scott had had affairs with in recent years, and that his wife had no idea. She explained that Scott was an expert manipulator, that he took advantage of women who were going through moments of vulnerability, or who, like Amanda, were influenced by people like Kristen. Lauren also told me she could help me gather evidence if I was planning to do something about it, and I told her, yes, that I was definitely going to do something. After almost 2 weeks of pretending I was considering the open marriage, I told Amanda I'd made a decision. She was sitting on the couch, anxious to hear my answer, and I told her I was willing to try it, but with one condition. If she was going to go out with Scott, I also wanted the freedom to explore connections with other people. Amanda completely agreed. She even seemed happy that I understood, and told me this could strengthen our marriage in the end. I nodded and told her that then she could go out with Scott that Friday, and I'd do the same with someone else. Friday came and Amanda dressed up like I'd never seen her, like she bought a new dress, got her nails done, everything. She left the house around 7 at night, telling me she'd be back late, not to wait up. I told her it was fine, that I also had plans. As soon as she left, I called Lauren and told her to execute the plan we'd prepared. Lauren came to the house with another friend, Ashley, who had agreed to help me out of solidarity more than anything. The idea was simple. When Amanda came back, she'd find herself in a situation similar to the one she'd put me in. Amanda returned home around 11 at night. Obviously, she'd been with Scott. She opened the door, expecting to find the house dark and me asleep, but instead, she found me in the living room with Ashley, both of us on the couch watching a movie, with wine glasses on the table. Amanda's face was priceless. She went from surprise to confusion and then to something I can only describe as instant jealousy. I stood up and told her, "Honey, look, meet Ashley. We were having a wonderful date here at home while you were out. Wasn't that what we agreed on? Exploring connections with other people?" Amanda froze and then exploded. She started screaming about how dare I bring another woman into our house, that it was a horrible disrespect, that I didn't understand how open relationships worked. I told her, "Calm down, Amanda. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Modernizing our marriage, exploring new connections, all that stuff Scott and Kristen taught you." She told me this was different, that I'd crossed a line, and I just laughed. Ashley said goodbye politely and left. Her role was already fulfilled, and I was left alone with Amanda in the living room. Then I pulled out the divorce papers I'd prepared over the last 2 weeks with help from a lawyer. I put them in front of her on the table and told her, "Here's my real answer, Amanda. I'm not going to share you. I'm not going to modernize our marriage, and I'm definitely not staying with someone who betrayed me and then tried to convince me I was the one who didn't understand love." Amanda started crying, saying this wasn't fair, that she'd been honest with me, that she deserved a second chance. I told her that being honest, after you get caught, doesn't count as honesty, and that the only reason she'd told me everything was because I caught her red-handed. I gave her a week to pack her things and leave the house. During that week, we barely spoke. She tried several times to convince me to reconsider, but I'd already made my decision. Meanwhile, Lauren and I continued gathering information about Scott. Turns out his wife didn't know anything about his affairs, and when we contacted the other 2 women who'd been with him, both confirmed that Scott had told them exactly the same thing as Amanda. That love shouldn't have restrictions, that monogamous relationships were obsolete, all that manipulative speech. With all that information, Lauren decided to speak with HR at the company where they worked. She presented evidence that Scott was using his position in the office to manipulate younger female employees, creating a hostile work environment. The internal investigation was quick and conclusive. Scott was fired 2 weeks later. His wife found out about everything thanks to one of the other women who contacted her directly, and from what I heard later, she also asked him for a divorce. Amanda tried to come back to me about a month after Scott completely ghosted her. She showed up at the house crying, saying she'd made the worst mistake of her life, that Scott had only used her and then discarded her when things got difficult. She begged me to forgive her, that we could start over, that she now understood the value of what we had. I looked at her and felt nothing. Not anger or sadness, just a kind of emptiness where there used to be love. I told her no, that the divorce was moving forward, and that she needed to sign the papers once and for all. She signed the next day. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago. Amanda had to leave her job because the situation became unbearable after Scott was fired and everyone found out what had happened. Kristen, ironically, was also transferred to another branch because several employees complained that she was promoting inappropriate behavior in the office. The last time I heard about Amanda, she was living with her parents, trying to rebuild her life. I'm okay, I guess. There are difficult days where I still wonder how 6 years got destroyed so quickly, but there are also days where I feel relieved to have discovered who Amanda really was before we had kids or bought a house together. Ashley and I have become friends. Nothing romantic because neither of us is ready for that, but it's nice to have someone to talk to who understands everything I went through. Lauren also became a good friend, and I'll be eternally grateful to her for helping me expose Scott and prevent him from continuing to manipulate more women. Last week, I ran into Amanda at the supermarket. She tried to come over to talk, but I just nodded politely and went on my way. There's nothing more to say, honestly. Sometimes people show you who they really are, and all you can do is believe them and move forward. And that's exactly what I'm doing.